Now listen, this is the way out of the movie. The so-called Civil War ended. So-called slavery was declared abolished. Millions of so-called black people were newly freed. They faced a hostile South. They faced a nation unsure of their place as people who had been hit in the head. This is the storyline they give us. You see, Lincoln never freed the slaves. He just ended the war on paper. He ended Rome's power of Christian property on paper. We will get more into that later. You see, at first before the Dawes-Rolls Act, which was used for tribal enrollment, categorized people as either blood citizens or freedmen, creating a false binary that excluded freedmen, and becoming a citizen made natives lose their birthrights as well. Before and during the Dawes-Rolls, which was an act, most Native Americans were changed into blacks. Negroes and colored folk are freedmen. The U.S. government created the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands in 1865. This was commonly known as the Freedmen's Bureau. Its stated mission was to help. They were to disguise as a provider for food, which became later known as food stamps, clothing, goodwill, Freemasons, so-called medical care, Tuskegee experiment, and re-education into Roman ideology, public schools. They say it was to help formerly Native Americans who were falsely labeled as slaves, but were prisoners of war transitioned to freedom in the new Roman Empire. This was the public face of the Bureau, a face of so-called aid and assistance, welfare or farewell, to rock the real Native Americans back asleep. The Bureau was meant to be a temporary measure from one side who didn't see the full game. A bridge changing Native Americans to slaves to U.S. citizenship. They established boarding schools for indoctrination of Black Native American children and adults. It supervised labor contracts between Native Americans who had now accepted the title freedmen and new landowners, who were the free white man. It aimed to ensure so-called fair treatment. It managed lands confiscated or abandoned during the war. Some of these lands were to be distributed to Native Americans who took the deal to abandon their birthrights. The promise of land for your birthrights was a powerful one. It represented true slavery. It represented economic dependence. The Bureau held the hopes of many. Many believed in its benevolent purpose. However, the Bureau operated in a complex and often contradictory environment. The forces of white supremacy were strong, guiding the wheel. They resisted any change to the old order. The Bureau itself was underfunded. It was often understaffed and infiltrated with devils. Its so-called good agents varied in their commitment and effectiveness. The Freedmen Bureau was more game to make it look like Native Americans were slaves who came to America on a slave ship from Africa. Now listen, the Freedmen Bureau was supposed to nationalize you and give you back your land, but instead they labeled you as wards, modern-day slaves of the state. A ward of the state is a person, typically a minor or an adult with disabilities, who is under the care and protection of the government. This usually occurs when they lack a competent parent or guardian to provide for their basic needs and well-being. The state assumes responsibility for their care, making decisions about their medical treatment, finances, and other important matters. Children become wards of the state when they have been removed from their parents' care due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment, or when their parents are unable or unwilling to provide for them. The state, through a child welfare agency, assumes responsibility for their care, often placing them in foster care or group homes. Adults with cognitive impairments or other disabilities may become wards of the state when they are unable to manage their own affairs and lack family support. In such cases, the state may appoint a guardian to make decisions on their behalf. In most states, the state acts as a guardian, making decisions in the best interest of the ward, while also ensuring the ward's rights are protected. So what are they saying? You are incompetent. In legal terms, incompetent generally means lacking the legal capacity or ability to perform a specific task or make decisions. This can apply to individuals, evidence, or even legal entities like courts. A person deemed incompetent lacks the mental capacity to understand and manage their own affairs due to age, mental illness, or other disabilities. A court may appoint a guardian, lawyer, or conservator to make decisions on their behalf, including financial, medical, and legal matters. In criminal law, incompetent refers to a defendant's inability to understand the nature of the charges and proceedings, making them unfit to stand trial or testify. A court can be deemed incompetent if it lacks the legal authority, power, or qualifications to hear a particular case or make a specific decision. Incompetent in law has multiple meanings. It can refer to individuals lacking the capacity to manage their affairs, to evidence that is not admissible in court, or to legal entities lacking the required authority. The specific meaning depends on the context in which the term is used. Now, by you going off to call yourself a crayon, you know black, they consider you as wards and incompetent because you don't know your nationality. Native Americans as wards. As the 19th century progressed, the U.S. government developed a peculiar legal status for Native Americans. They were deemed wards of the state, but the reality was far from benevolent. It was another way to undermine Native sovereignty and dispossess Native nations of their lands. Their affairs were managed by foreign federal agencies, most notably the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This control was justified by racist ideas that Native peoples were uncivilized. They were denied the rights of citizens and the recognition of their distinct tribal identities. The ward of the state doctrine effectively made Native Americans prisoners in their own lands. Like we said, the Freedmen's Bureau, officially the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, was a U.S. foreign federal agency established in 1865 during Reconstruction. Its primary purpose was to assist former Native Americans who had now been reclassified as blacks, Negroes, and colored, and former POWs, who had now been labeled as slaves. The Freedmen Bureau would only help those Native Americans who had accepted the title former slave or colored. Those who wouldn't accept the new label was excluded from the so-called abandoned land grab. Those who accepted the deal with the devil were promised 40 acres and a mule under sharecropping agreements, contracts, and would become long-term tenants. 40 acres and a mule was a promise made to formerly Native Americans who accepted the new title enslaved African Americans narrative after the Civil War, aimed at running game on them with the means to establish a new economic dependence, a new world order. It involved a land grant of 40 acres of land, along with a mule for plowing, to each formerly Native American family who had reclassified giving up their birthrights. This promise stemmed from Special Field Orders No. 15 issued by General Sherman during the war, which aimed to redistribute land to Native Americans who accepted the label Black people in certain regions which the U.S. government deemed abandoned land. You see, once they had reclassified the Native Americans to Black, Negroes, and colored, they could no longer claim indigenous status on their own land, so it was considered to be abandoned. Abandoned law generally refers to the legal concept of abandonment, which involves the voluntary relinquishment of rights or interests in a property or legal matter with the intent to never reclaim them. This can apply to various types of property, including real estate, personal belongings, intellectual property, and even legal claims or proceedings. The owner must intend to give up their rights or claim to the property or matter. The act of abandonment must be voluntary, not forced. But they force most of the Native Americans at gunpoint. They said you had no intention to return to your land. The individual abandoning the property or right generally has no intention of returning or reclaiming it. Depending on the context, abandonment can result in the loss of ownership rights, property reverting to the state, or the property becoming subject to adverse possession by others. Tangible personal property left behind by an owner with no intention of retrieving it. Abandonment of intellectual property, relinquishing rights to intellectual property, such as trademarks or patents, often by not actively using or defending them. So to sum it up on how they used abandoned land laws to steal the Native Americans' land was, say your name is John Smith, right? You have a townhouse on 3 acres of land. Well, one day, you just so happen to get amnesia. Amnesia is a condition characterized by memory loss, affecting the ability to recall past events or learn new information. It can be temporary or permanent, and can be caused by various factors, including head injuries, trauma, or certain medical conditions. You know, you suffered from trauma from going through 250 years of wars. You suffered from head injuries because you are the builders that were hit in the head 3 times. You are the mound builders. But anyway, John Smith gets hit in the head. Now he forgot he was John Smith. So when the people come to the house looking for John Smith, the owner of the house, John Smith is saying, he's not John Smith, he's a crayon, I'm black. The people are saying, where's John Smith, the owner of the house? John Smith replies, he went to go live off in the desert on this new thing called reservations. So the people say John Smith must have abandoned his property estate. but they know they're talking to John Smith, who they hit in the head because they took pictures of him before they knocked him in the top of his head. The so-called Black American Negroes, who are the real Native Americans, are your John Smiths. Squatters' rights, also known as adverse possession, refers to the legal principle allowing someone to gain ownership of a property by occupying it openly and continuously for a specified period, meeting certain conditions according to Pacific Legal Foundation and Wikipedia. These rights vary significantly by jurisdiction, but generally involve proof of continuous, open, and notorious occupancy, as well as payment of property taxes if required. What is adverse possession? The squatter must physically occupy the property and use it as their own, as if they were the true owner. The occupancy must be continuous and not intermittent. The squatter cannot leave the property and then return to it later to claim ownership. The occupancy must be visible and known by the true owner or the community, meaning the squatter's presence is not concealed. The squatter's use of the property must be exclusive, meaning other people cannot use the property without the squatter's permission. Most jurisdictions have a minimum period of time, for example 10-15 years, that the squatter must occupy the property before they can claim ownership. Some jurisdictions require the squatter to have paid property taxes for the statutory period as well. Why do squatters' rights exist? Squatters' rights are intended to encourage landowners to maintain their property and to prevent property from being left abandoned or neglected. The purpose is to ensure that property is not lost by the true owner due to inaction. Are squatters' rights legally recognized? Yes. Squatters' rights are legally recognized in many jurisdictions, including the United States and the United Kingdom, according to the Pacific Legal Foundation and gov.uk. The specific requirements and time periods for claiming ownership can vary significantly from state to state and country to country. The term squatters' rights is often used in the context of modern squatting, but it's important to note that these are not always the same thing. Modern squatting, especially on occupied properties, is often a form of trespassing, not necessarily a claim to ownership through adverse possession. Squatters' rights are not automatic. A squatter must demonstrate that they have met all the requirements for claiming ownership. So, to sum it up, after they got you to abandon your estate by abandoning your nationality, reclassifying you as former slaves, freedmen, or just colored to later become U.S. citizens, they used squatters' rights to steal the Native Americans' land. But once the true Native Americans wake up, the squatters, who are really colonizers, become trespassers. In legal terms, trespassing means entering or remaining on someone else's property without their permission or the legal right to do so. It's a violation of the property owner's right to exclusive possession and enjoyment of their land. Trespassing can be a crime, a civil wrong, a tort, or both, depending on the circumstances and the specific laws of the jurisdiction. So-called slavery ended in the United States through a combination of factors, including the so-called Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified on December 6, 1865. It officially abolished so-called slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States, marking a significant step in the fight for so-called civil rights. President Lincoln issued the so-called Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring so-called slaves, who were really Native Americans under prisoners of war in Confederate territories, to be free. It was primarily a wartime measure aimed at weakening the Confederacy and inspiring enslaved Native American people to join the Union Army. The Civil War, fought over the issue of Native Americans who had been made into slaves and states' rights, resulted in the Union victory and ultimately undermined the institution of the Native Americans. They still made so-called slavery legal as punishment for a crime. Keep in mind, all crimes are commerce, and the private-owned prisons are full of 70% Native Americans. This amendment provided the legal framework for the end of slavery on paper, the game that was being ran, but it kept the idea going that Nubians in America were brought from Africa as nothing but slaves, which was game. The idea was to use the black codes to turn you into Christian property under the doctrine of discovery. Chattel refers to personal property that is movable and not attached to land, such as furniture, vehicles, or livestock. It's a broad category encompassing any property that isn't real estate. Chattel is a term used to describe tangible personal property that can be moved. This includes items like furniture, cars, boats, appliances, and some cases pets, which could be humans that think they're crayons. Chattel is distinct from real estate, which is defined as land and buildings permanently attached to it. If you own the person who owns the land, you own the land. Historically, the term chattel also referred to slaves, but this usage is now considered archaic and offensive. Chattel can be subject to laws regarding ownership, transfer, and mortgages, especially in the context of chattel mortgages. While chattel is generally movable, some items that were once chattel can become fixtures when they are permanently attached to real property, like built-in appliances. Chattel slavery is a system where enslaved people are legally treated as property, meaning they can be bought, sold, and owned like livestock or other possessions. In this system, enslaved people are denied basic human rights and freedoms, and their offspring are automatically considered property of their owner. The doctrine of discovery was a papal and European royal concept that legitimized Christian conquest of non-Christian lands, including those of indigenous peoples. It effectively denied indigenous peoples' claim to their lands, as it argued that the land was discovered by Christian explorers and could then be claimed by Christian rulers. This doctrine was used to justify colonialism, enslavement, and the subjugation of indigenous populations. The doctrine of discovery originated in a series of papal bulls issued by the Catholic Church in the late 15th century, including Dum Diversas and Romanus Pontifex, which were used to justify the colonization of the Americas and other non-Christian lands. These bulls asserted that Christian rulers had the right to discover and claim lands inhabited by non-Christians, essentially disregarding the existing claims and rights of indigenous peoples. The doctrine of discovery was used to justify European colonial expansion, enslavement of indigenous peoples, and the suppression of their cultures and religions. While formally disavowed by Pope Francis in 2023, the doctrine's legacy continues to influence contemporary legal and political debates surrounding indigenous rights and land claims. Nationality refers to the legal status of belonging to a particular nation, usually indicated by citizenship. It's determined by where a person was born, their parents' nationality, or through naturalization, becoming a citizen of a country. In essence, it's the legal connection a person has with a specific country, land. Nationality is a legal concept that defines a person's relationship with a state. A person's nationality is often, but not always, the same as their citizenship. Nationality is typically determined by birthright, born in a country, parentage, born to a citizen of a country, or through naturalization, a process where someone becomes a citizen of a country, land, they weren't born in. If someone is born in the United States, they may be considered an American, regardless of their ethnicity or race. This is done on purpose as a form of colonization. Similarly, if someone is born in France, they are considered French. The right to nationality is a fundamental human right, meaning every person has the right to belong to a particular nation-state. This right ensures individuals are legally connected to a state, land, granting them the ability to acquire and exercise the rights and responsibilities associated with that nationality. It's a non-derogable right, meaning it cannot be taken away or restricted except in specific circumstances, where the person agrees to it. Nationality establishes a legal connection between an individual and a state or land, forming the basis for belonging to a political community. Acquisition, change, and retention. The right to nationality includes the right to acquire a nationality, typically through birth or naturalization, to change nationality, if circumstances allow, and to retain one's nationality. The right to nationality is recognized in international human rights law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR. Article 15 of the UDHR states that everyone has the right to a nationality, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. Nationality is crucial for individuals to fully participate in society and enjoy their other human rights. It enables access to education, employment, healthcare, and other essential services, as well as the right to vote and stand for office. The lack of a nationality can have severe consequences, leading to statelessness and the denial of basic rights and exclusion from society. States have a duty to respect the right to nationality, ensuring it is recognized without discrimination. Imagine a person without a nationality as being like someone without a home or a country to belong to. The right to nationality ensures that everyone has a legal link to a land, which is essential for a full and meaningful life. Losing one's nationality or citizenship can have significant consequences, but forgetting it, in the sense of a memory lapse, would not inherently change a person's nationality. Nationality is a legal status, usually determined by factors like place of birth or parentage, or through naturalization. However, situations can arise that may lead to the loss of nationality or the creation of statelessness, which can have severe impacts on an individual's life. Consequences of losing nationality or becoming stateless include lack of legal protection and denial of basic rights. Stateless persons are not recognized as citizens of any country, meaning they may be denied access to education, healthcare, employment, housing, freedom of movement, and political participation. Difficulty in accessing essential, without official documents like a passport or national ID. Stateless individuals may struggle to open bank accounts, register births, marriages or deaths, or even find formal employment. Increased vulnerability to exploitation and abuse. Stateless people are more likely to face discrimination, arbitrary detention, forced labor, trafficking, and violence. Restrictions on movement. They may face limitations on travel, both domestically and internationally. This is why so-called Black people are always getting pulled over by the police who are a foreign occupying military. Emotional and psychological impacts. Statelessness can lead to feelings of exclusion, alienation, despair, and a sense of not belonging anywhere. Common causes of statelessness include gaps in nationality laws. If nationality laws are not carefully drafted or applied, some individuals can be excluded, leading to statelessness. Certain groups, particularly ethnic, racial, religious, or gender minorities, may be denied nationality based on discriminatory laws or practices. State succession or border changes. When new countries emerge or borders shift, individuals or groups may lose their nationality or struggle to prove their connection to a new state. Loss or deprivation of nationality. In some cases, states may strip individuals of their nationality, potentially leaving them stateless. Lack of birth registration. While not the same as statelessness, lack of documentation can make it difficult to establish nationality and increase the risk of becoming stateless. International efforts are being made to address statelessness, with UNHCR and other organizations working to identify, protect, and reduce the number of stateless people worldwide. So, under the new terms they created, Blacks, Negroes, and Colored, you become stateless. Black people have no land, no flag, and they don't have their own language. They then say, you are African Americans as U.S. citizens. They say, U.S. citizen is your nationality. Meanwhile, they are robbing you for your estate on the back end. U.S. citizen is not a true nationality, because USA is not a country, it's a business. Recovering nationality after paper genocide, which is the deliberate erasure of a group's identity from official records to deny their existence and rights, is a complex and ongoing process. It involves individual and collective efforts to reclaim and assert identity, history, and rights. Documenting and preserving history, researching and gathering historical records, oral histories, and cultural artifacts to reconstruct a group's history and demonstrate their continued existence and connection to their heritage. This can include family histories, tribal records, government documents, and personal narratives. Cultural revitalization, practicing and passing down cultural traditions, languages, and practices to future generations. This helps maintain cultural identity and connection to ancestry despite efforts to erase them. Advocacy and awareness campaigns. Educating the public and policymakers about the impact of paper genocide and advocating for policies that support the recognition and rights of affected groups. This can involve raising awareness through media, community events, and engaging with government officials. Seeking legal recognition. Pursuing legal avenues to regain official recognition of their group's existence and rights. This may involve challenging discriminatory laws and policies or petitioning for tribal recognition. For example, the Patawomek tribe is working towards federal recognition to strengthen their culture and heritage. Community healing and empowerment. Supporting community-led initiatives that address the trauma and generational impacts of paper genocide. This can involve fostering community connections, providing mental health support, and promoting cultural resilience. Virginia tribes. Despite the challenges posed by the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which reclassified Native Americans as colored regardless of their identity, 7 tribes in Virginia have successfully gained federal recognition. Taino people in Puerto Rico. Despite being declared extinct in historical records, the Taino people are reclaiming their identity through research, cultural revival, and by challenging census data that previously lacked an option for their identification. Difficulty in documenting ancestry. Paper genocide often involved the deliberate destruction or alteration of records, making it difficult to trace ancestral lineage. Discriminatory laws and policies can create barriers to recognition and rights. Some institutions and individuals may resist acknowledging the historical wrongs and their impact. In conclusion, regaining nationality after paper genocide is a multifaceted process that requires resilience, dedication, and collective action. It is a journey of healing, reclamation, and asserting the right to self-determination. 40 acres and a mule for your birthrights. They knew this was game. They didn't have that many mules. This was another broken promise. On March 3, 1865, the 40 acres and a mule promise was a plan proposed by General William T. Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton to provide formerly Native Americans who accepted the enslaved African Americans narrative with land and resources for economic dependence. The Freedmen's Bureau was later established to oversee the plan and address the needs of new classified freedmen. Field Order No. 15. This order, issued by General Sherman, designated 400,000 acres of Confederate land along the southeast coast for distribution to Native Americans who were willing to reclassify as freedmen in 40-acre plots. Created by Congress, the Freedmen's Bureau was tasked with providing assistance to freed POWs, who became slaves through prisoners of war, including re-education, so-called legal aid, and other funny services. While the promise was widely held and expected, it was largely unfulfilled. While not all so-called freedmen, who were once Native Americans, who took the deal with the devil, received land as promise. The 40 acres and a mule became a symbol of the promise of land ownership and economic dependence for former Native Americans who were enslaved people through 250 years of wars. The Freedmen's Bureau played a vital role in tricking freedmen who were former Native Americans, particularly in the absence of the 40 acres and a mule plan, and they still lost their birthrights. You see, the Freedmen Bureau and 40 acres and a mule promise got scrapped because too many Native Americans accepted the deal to give up their birthrights for 40 acres and a mule to provide for their families. 20% of the 100 million Native Americans who were left signed right up for the deal, that's 20 million people. Once the pale-face working for the Black Hand families of private-owned bankers ran the numbers, it came out to 800 million acres and 20 million mules, which they didn't have. They only had 400,000 acres and a couple mules. If they gave 20 million Native Americans back their land, they would take back over the land by default. The total land area of the United States is approximately 2.26 billion acres. This includes all land within the U.S. borders, including water bodies. The Homestead Act, signed into law in 1862, allowed so-called white colonizers to claim up to 160 acres of public land, and by 1865, the government had granted over 270 million acres to free white men who were colonizers. The 13 Black Hand families were mad that Abraham Lincoln broke their contract, the 13th Amendment. You hear it. They had lost their Christian property, or stock, on paper, because all slaves who were indigenous people in the Americas belonged to the Roman Empire under the Papal Bull and Doctrine of Discovery. The 40 acres and a mule was supposedly to support impoverished poor whites as well, who were convicts from Europe brought over by the Moors in the South with basic needs like food, shelter, and medical care. The impoverished poor whites mostly received the 40 acres and a mule over the Native Americans who had gave up their birthrights. The Bureau also played a sneaky role in establishing boarding schools to inject Roman control into the Native American children's veins, mediating labor contracts, and providing so-called legal assistance to former Native Americans. Once the numbers didn't add up on giving out that much land and they didn't have that many mules, the world elite bankers saw that this wasn't a good idea. The lack of land ownership forced many Native American people into sharecropping, a system where they rented land from white landowners and worked for a portion of the crops, often leading to debt and exploitation. White Southern colonizers actively resisted the land redistribution efforts, employing tactics like black codes, laws restricting Native Americans who were now Black people's rights, and intimidation by the KKK to maintain their control over land and labor. The Black Codes led to Jim Crow. The failure of 40 acres and a mule has been linked to the persistent racial wealth gap in the United States, as Native American families who were reclassified as Black families were denied the opportunity to build wealth through land ownership. Sharecropping is a legal arrangement in which a landowner, which was now the U.S. government, allows a tenant to use the land in return for a share of the crops produced on that land. Sharecropping is not to be conflated with tenant farming, providing the tenant with a higher economic slave position and social status. A tenant is someone who rents property from an owner, landlord, for a specific period under a lease agreement. The owner, also known as the landlord, is the legal owner of the property and is responsible for maintaining it and enforcing the lease agreement. A tenant rents the property from the owner. The tenant agrees to pay rent or taxes for the right to occupy and use the property. The tenant likes paying rent on time and maintaining the property in a certain condition. The owner is the landlord. The owner, in which case is the Roman Church and the Roman Empire under the Papal Bull and Doctrine of the Discovery, owns the property and has complete control and use of it. But the tenant is responsible for maintaining the property, making necessary repairs, and ensuring it is habitable. The owner creates the lease agreement, contract, and can take action against a tenant who violates it. You, the Native Americans, are really the owners, landlord, and they are the tenants who are now trespassing. The owner has the right to enter the property with proper notice for inspections or repairs. A tenant farmer is a farmer or farm worker who resides and works on land owned by a landlord, while tenant farming is an agricultural production system in which landowners contribute their land and often a measure of operating capital and management, while tenant farmers contribute their labor along with at times varying amounts of capital and management. Depending on the terms of their contract, tenants may make payments to the owner either of a fixed portion of the product, in cash, or in a combination. The rights the tenant has over the land, the form, and measures of payment vary across systems, geographically and chronologically. In some systems, the tenant could be evicted at whim, tenancy at will. In others, the landowner and tenant sign a contract for a fixed number of years, tenancy for years or indenture. In most developed countries today, at least some restrictions are placed on the rights of landlords to evict tenants under normal circumstances. They robbed the Native Americans of their land by taking their nationality, reclassifying them as blacks, Negroes, and colored, then giving them back their land as sharecroppers, now not being the owners or landlords, but now as tenants, making them still Christian property under the Papal Bulls. This is why you have to pay rent, which is taxes on your land and house. And as long as you agree not to be John Smith, they can do it all in the name of the Pope and Jesus. Keep in mind, Black people is not a nationality. Claiming land without a nationality is not generally possible under most legal systems. Most countries have laws and regulations that govern land ownership, and these usually require a person or entity, like a company, to have legal standing, often by being a citizen or resident of that country. Land ownership is typically determined by legal documents like deeds or titles, which provide evidence of ownership. These documents often require the owner to have a legal status that allows them to own property within a given jurisdiction. While some countries allow foreign nationals to purchase property, many have specific regulations and requirements for non-citizens. These requirements may include additional taxes, permits, or restrictions based on the country. The concept of terra nullius, Latin for nobody's land, has been used historically to justify claims of territory by states, but it's not a widely recognized or accepted principle in international law today. Some legal systems recognize adverse possession, where a person can gain ownership of land by occupying it for a certain period. But this also typically requires meeting specific criteria and demonstrating a continuous and open claim of possession. There might be very specific circumstances where someone without a formal nationality could acquire land through a legal process, such as inheriting property or acquiring it through a treaty. However, these are usually exceptions rather than the norm. No, blacks, African Americans, colored nor Negroes is a nationality. Race refers to a social construct that categorizes people based on perceived physical characteristics, such as skin color, hair texture, and facial features. Blacks is commonly used as a racial category. Nationality refers to a person's citizenship, which is determined by their legal connection to a particular nation-state or country. Race is about physical traits, while nationality is about legally belonging to a country, land. People of various races can be citizens of the same country, and people of the same race can be citizens of different countries. For example, a person with black skin can be a citizen of the United States, Canada, Brazil, Nigeria, or any other country. Their nationality would be American, Canadian, Brazilian, Nigerian, etc., respectively, not blacks. In summary, black is a racial classification, while nationality is a legal designation indicating a person's citizenship in a particular country. The Native Americans who became known as black were paper genocide. Paper genocide is a term used to describe the intentional destruction or manipulation of records and documents related to a specific group of people with the goal of erasing their history, culture, and existence on paper. A person without citizenship is called a stateless person. In international law, this means they are not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. Stateless individuals often face significant challenges in accessing basic rights and services, and may be denied access to education, healthcare, formal employment, and even official legal recognition. A stateless person is someone who is not recognized as a citizen by any country. They lack a formal legal bond with any government. Statelessness can arise from various factors, including gaps in nationality laws, administrative errors, changes in political boundaries, or discriminatory practices. Stateless individuals face a wide range of difficulties, including lack of access to basic rights. Education, healthcare, employment, housing, and freedom of movement are often denied. Difficulty obtaining legal identity documents. Birth certificates, passports, and ID cards are crucial for accessing many services. Marginalization and discrimination. Stateless people may experience social isolation and prejudice. With international protection, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, plays a key role in addressing statelessness, advocating for the rights of stateless people, and helping them acquire nationality. Being statelessness significantly complicates and limits access to many rights, including property ownership. There are nuances and exceptions. Without citizenship, stateless people often lack the fundamental legal framework and recognition necessary to formally acquire and own property. Difficulty accessing services and opportunities. Statelessness can limit access to essential services and opportunities such as formal employment, education, and banking, which are often prerequisites for obtaining property. Stateless individuals are more vulnerable to exploitation and discrimination, which can make it harder to secure and maintain ownership of property. While being stateless creates significant obstacles to property ownership due to lack of legal recognition and limited access to essential services, it does not mean that a stateless person can never own anything. International agreements and individual circumstances may offer limited possibilities, but it is important to acknowledge the immense challenges faced by stateless individuals in securing their rights and access to basic necessities, including property. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States, serving from 1861 until he bankrupts the USA Corporation, which led to the black families who are world bankers to putting the play on him. I guess you can say Lincoln was messing with the church's money. John Wilkes Booth was a Knights of Templar assassin. President Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. John Wilkes Booth, an actor and Confederate sympathizer, assassinated Lincoln while he was attending a performance of Our American Cousin. Booth shot Lincoln in the back of the head with a .44 Derringer pistol. Lincoln died the following morning at 7:22 a.m. assassinated by the Druids, the Black Hand private-owned world bankers in London. 1865. Once they got rid of Lincoln, they hired someone they could trust, someone with balls of steel. They brought in their bulldog, Andrew Jackson. Following Lincoln's assassination, President Andrew Jackson, a sympathetic figure to the South, overturned Sherman's order and restored property rights to former Confederate landowners. The Black Hand scripted President Andrew Jackson to later reverse many of the policies Abraham Lincoln had set up, including revoking Field Order No. 15, the 40 acres and mule deal, and return the land to pre-war landowners who were free white colonizers. The 40 acres and a mule phrase has become a symbol of the ongoing struggle for reparations and economic justice for descendants of Native Americans, who were reclassified as slaves after many wars in the United States, which is really Turtle Island, the Northgate, Tamari. Andrew Jackson moves on the chessboard, all steered by the Black Druids, effectively negated the initial promise and left many Native American people who were considered landless or stateless after reclassification, leading to the widespread practice of sharecropping, which perpetuated poverty and inequality. In the context of early American law, free white person primarily referred to a specific group of individuals eligible for citizenship through naturalization. This term, used in the Naturalization Act of 1790, effectively excluded non-white persons, enslaved people, indentured servants, and women from naturalization. In essence, it meant that only white males who were not enslaved or indentured were considered eligible to become citizens. The Naturalization Act of 1790, which established the initial rules for naturalization, specified that only free white persons could become citizens after meeting certain residency and character requirements. Keep in mind, the Moors fall up under free white persons as well. Free white person has nothing to do with skin tone. This racial restriction had significant consequences, limiting citizenship to a select group of individuals. The term free further emphasized that enslaved and indentured persons were not eligible, regardless of their race. This definition of free white person had a profound impact on the development of citizenship in the United States, creating a legal distinction between those eligible for citizenship and those excluded. The racial restriction remained in effect until 1952, when Congress eliminated the racial requirement for citizenship. They needed a new plan to get more stock. They came up with the 14th Amendment. Now here's where things get tricky. They now offer U.S. citizenship to Native Americans who had been reclassified as blacks, Negroes, and colored. Under the new script, they would still be blacks, Negroes, and colored, keeping them as Christian stock and property, but they would also now have U.S. citizenship. The 14th Amendment was passed by Congress on June 13, 1866, and then ratified on July 9, 1868. This amendment granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including formerly Native Americans who were enslaved people, and provided all citizens with equal protection under the laws, according to the U.S. Senate. This amendment established that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. While the 13th Amendment abolished so-called slavery, it did not explicitly grant citizenship to former Native Americans who became slaves through wars, according to the Jack Miller Center. So, they so-called naturalized you as long as you came up under their jurisdiction. Key word here is subject, plus they never gave you back your original identity. Slaves through prisoners of war refers to a historical practice where captured individuals, particularly those during or after armed conflict, were taken as slaves instead of being treated as prisoners of war. This practice occurred in various cultures and eras and could involve individuals from different groups being enslaved. Prisoners of war are typically held captive by a belligerent power during or immediately after an armed conflict. The standard practice was for prisoners to be exchanged or released after the conflict ended. In some cases, rather than being exchanged or released, captured individuals were enslaved. This could happen for various reasons, including the lack of resources to maintain the prisoners or the desire to exploit the captives' labor. Historically, prisoners of war were often enslaved as galley slaves, working on ships, or as laborers in mines or other industries. During the Crusades, captured non-Christians were sometimes sold into slavery. and in the ancient Mediterranean, galley rowers were often free men. But slaves were used as rowers when manpower was in high demand, according to Wikipedia. The English word slave has roots in the Slavic tribes who were frequently captured and enslaved by the Moors. The Byzantine Greek word for slave, sklavos, is derived from the Slavic self-name, Slovene, indicating a history of Slavic people being captured and enslaved, according to Wikipedia. During World War II, numerous individuals, including prisoners of war, were forced into labor for German industry. This included Poles, Soviet workers, and others from occupied territories. The practice of enslaving prisoners of war is a complex and often brutal aspect of history, reflecting the changing attitudes towards war and the treatment of captives over time. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified on July 9, 1868. In legal terms, the subject in subject matter jurisdiction refers to the specific type of legal issues or disputes that a court is authorized to hear and decide. It's not about who the parties in a case are, which is personal jurisdiction, but rather about the nature of the case itself. Subject matter jurisdiction. This refers to the court's power to hear a case based on the type of legal issue involved. A family court typically has subject matter jurisdiction over family law matters like divorce, child custody, and adoption, while a criminal court handles cases involving criminal law. Different courts have different subject matter jurisdictions. Some courts, like federal courts, have broad jurisdiction over a wide range of cases, while others have limited jurisdiction over specific types of cases, such as bankruptcy or small claims court. For a court to hear a case, it must have subject matter jurisdiction over the issue being raised. If a court lacks subject matter jurisdiction, it cannot hear the case and must dismiss it. Unlike personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction cannot be waived by the parties involved. The Freedmen's Bureau game ended in 1872. While the Bureau was officially established in 1865, its work was largely concluded by 1868 after they got rid of Lincoln, and the agency was formally dissolved in 1872 due to funding limitations and waning political will. Allodial title versus deed, a key difference in property ownership. The difference between an allodial title and a deed lies in their fundamental nature regarding property ownership. Allodial title represents the concept of absolute and unrestricted ownership of real property, where the owner has complete control over their land without any obligations or restrictions imposed by an outside authority or superior landlord. This means, in theory, properties with allodial title would not be subject to property taxes, liens, or eminent domain. A deed, on the other hand, is a legal document that serves as tangible evidence of ownership and transfers ownership of real property from one party to another. While a deed indicates ownership, it is important to understand that in most modern property systems, especially in the United States, ownership is typically based on fee simple title. Fee simple title provides substantial rights to the owner, but still acknowledges that the property is subject to certain government regulations, taxes, and potential eminent domain, meaning it's still owned by the Pope. You still got to pay taxes to the crown. Think of it this way. Allodial title, the ultimate form of ownership akin to true sovereignty over your property, theoretically free from external claims. Deed, the physical document used to record the transaction that transfers legal ownership, usually in fee simple. In summary, allodial title represents absolute, unrestricted ownership. Deed, a document confirming a property ownership transfer, commonly used for fee simple titles. True allodial title is very rare in the modern world, including in the United States without nationality, as most land ownership is subject to government regulations and taxes keeping you as a tenant. You can never own the allodial title without a nationality. You can only be a sharecropper or tenant and get a deed which will list you as the tenant, even after you pay off your so-called mortgage, which is a dead pledge. A death pledge or mortgage is a legal agreement where a property is used as collateral for a loan and the pledge, the property, dies when the loan is paid off or the borrower defaults. The term mortgage comes from the Old French mortgage, meaning dead pledge. The death refers to the end of the pledge, either through successful repayment or through foreclosure. Security for a loan. A mortgage is not the debt itself, but rather the lender's security for the debt. It's an agreement where the borrower uses their property as collateral for the loan. Dead pledge. The term death pledge reflects the nature of the agreement. The pledge, the property, is dead when the loan is paid in full, and the lender's security is no longer needed. Foreclosure. If the borrower fails to make payments, the lender can take possession of the property through foreclosure, and the pledge, the property, is then dead. Origin. The word mortgage comes from the Old French mortgage, which is a combination of mort, meaning dead, and gage, meaning pledge. Common association. Mortgages are commonly associated with real estate loans, especially for purchasing homes. Papal bulls issued in the 15th century, such as Dum Diversas, 1452, Romanus Pontifex, 1455, and Inter Caetera, 1493, granted authority to Christian monarchs of Europe to take control of lands not inhabited by Christians. These papal decrees provided religious justification for European explorers and colonial powers like Portugal and Spain to claim dominion over newly discovered lands, subjugate and enslave native peoples, promote the expansion of Christianity. The doctrine of discovery, therefore, facilitated the transfer of land ownership and control to European monarchs, and was later adopted into legal systems, like in the United States, as a means to dispossess indigenous peoples of their lands. It is important to note that the Vatican formally repudiated the doctrine of discovery in 2023, acknowledging the historical harm it caused to indigenous peoples. The Vatican emphasized that the concept was never part of the official Catholic faith. At first, the paper genocide word was colored, which widely used throughout the second half of the 19th century and early 20th century. The word Negro. This term was common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and prominent figures like Webb Du Bois advocated for its use, emphasizing its potential for fostering group identity. The Afro-American term some, like T. Thomas Fortune, preferred this term in the early 20th century. African American. This term gained prominence later, particularly in the late 1980s, and is still widely used today. The shift to Black. The shift from Negro to Black as a primary self-identifier occurred in the 1960s, coinciding with the rise of the Black Power movement. Reasons for the shift. Activists like Stokely Carmichael pushed for the term Black to instill racial pride, express militancy, and work against racial injustice. Reclaiming the term Black was used to reclaim a term previously associated with negative images and to challenge the dominant discourse. Symbol of power. Black became a symbol of power and revolution. It's important to remember that these terms were not always universally accepted or used by everyone within the community, and the choice of which term to use has been a subject of ongoing discussion and debate. Beyond color and origin, while terms like Black and African American are widely used, it's also important to note that identity is complex and multifaceted. Some individuals may prefer to identify with more specific terms based on their heritage or cultural background. The concept of Blackness itself can also have cultural and political dimensions beyond simply skin color or ancestry. While the term mulatto and other similar terms were historically used to classify people of mixed racial ancestry, they are now considered outdated and potentially offensive. It's recommended to use more respectful terms like mixed race, biracial, or multiracial when discussing individuals with mixed racial backgrounds. How reclassification targeted Native lands. The reclassification of Native Americans as colored or freedmen was not merely an attack on identity. It was a direct assault on Native land rights. Land was the ultimate prize in post-Civil War America. The westward expansion was in full force. The desire for Native territories was insatiable. If a person was classified as a freedman rather than a Native citizen, their relationship to tribal land ownership changed dramatically. They could be seen as individuals without inherent rights to communal tribal lands. This was a key objective. Tribal lands were often held collectively. This communal ownership was a barrier to individual allotment and sale. The U.S. government sought to break up these communal holdings, reclassifying tribal members with dark skin ancestry as freedmen, which included all Native Americans, helped achieve this. These Native Americans who chose to accept the new script of freedmen could then be dealt with separately. Their land claims could be individualized, diminished, or extinguished. This made it easier to open up vast tracts of native land for white colonizers and resource extraction. The erasure of native identity was a means to an end. That end was land. Treaties forced upon the 5 civilized tribes required them to grant citizenship and land to their colonizers. This was unjust, but the implementation was twisted. The government used this process to further its own agenda of land acquisition. The Dawes Act of 1887 was a pivotal moment. It aimed to break up communal tribal lands. It sought to assimilate Native Americans into mainstream American society as individual landowners. The Dawes Commission was established to enroll members of the 5 civilized tribes. This enrollment process, creating the infamous Dawes Rolls, became a powerful tool of division. It solidified the false binary between blood citizens and freedmen. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate strategy. Divide and conquer. The commission meticulously created separate roles. One for citizens by blood who were so-called free white men, another for freedmen, who were Native Americans who sold their birthrights, and yet another for intermarried whites. The criteria for inclusion on these roles were often arbitrary. They were heavily influenced by racial prejudice. Individuals with known Native ancestry and deep community ties were sometimes relegated to the freedmen roles. This happened if they had visible dark skin features which included all Native Americans, or if their ancestors had been enslaved by the U.S. government. Their nativeness was denied. Their blackness was used to exclude them from full citizenship by blood. This division had devastating consequences. Citizens by blood, free white men, which included some Moors, were often prioritized. They received larger or better quality land allotments. Native Americans who sold their birthrights to be freedmen and citizens, despite their denial of tribal citizenship and ancestral ties to the land, were often treated as a separate, lesser, low, or second-class citizen. The categories imposed by the Dawes Commission were not just names on a list. They were poison. They seeped into the heart of Native nations. They fractured communities that had once been more fluid in their understanding of kinship and belonging. The Dawes Rolls made blood paramount. This new emphasis on blood versus freedman status created deep wounds. Families were split. Neighbors became suspicious. This line was drawn by an outside power to make it easier to control Native affairs. The historical decisions made by the Freedmen's Bureau and other government bodies have left deep scars. These scars are carried by Native Americans today. The reclassification, the land dispossession, these are living realities. They shape identity and affect tribal enrollment. The echoes of the past resonate strongly in the present. They echo in the blood. Many Native Americans today struggle for recognition. They fight to have their indigenous heritage acknowledged. Some tribes deny citizenship to descendants of freedmen, their ancestors who sold their birthrights for 40 acres, and a mule, creating painful divisions. It forces individuals to choose between their blackness and their nativeness, which is the same thing. The erasure of Native Americans' identity has had profound impacts. It has led to a loss of connection to ancestral lands and cultural practices. Reclaiming this heritage is an ongoing struggle. It requires challenging historical narratives. It requires educating others about this complex history. It requires asserting one's existence. This is a fight for soul, a fight for belonging. The ongoing effects are also material. The story of the Freedmen's Bureau and its sneaky role in the lives of Native Americans is complex. It is darker than the simple narratives of benevolence often told. The reclassification of Native peoples, particularly those with dark skin, was not an accident. It was a strategy to erase Native heritage and facilitate land theft. This is the uncomfortable truth we must confront. We must unmask his story. We must look beyond the stated intentions. The Dawes Rolls were a key instrument in this erasure. They carved up communities and created legacies of division that persist today. The broken promise of 40 acres and a mule compounded the injustices faced by Native Americans. They were caught between systems of oppression, both seeking to deny them their full humanity. Confronting this history is not about assigning blame. It is about understanding the mechanisms of racist policy. It is about seeing how institutions can perpetuate harm. It is about recognizing the enduring impact of these policies today. Truth is the first step. Without truth, there can be no reconciliation. There can be no justice. There can be no peace. Moving towards restitution requires more than just acknowledgement. We must be aware of history, the past, so that you can steer us to a better future. Hit that like button and be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We got more coming. Peace and enjoy your day.